Good afternoon. My name is Anne Winu. I'm the chair of the Nigeria-British Chamber of Commerce Advocacy Committee. And I'm delighted to invite you to today's Advocacy Roundtable, and it's themed Building a Coherent Monetary Policy Framework. I'm particularly delighted to introduce our distinguished panelists for today's webinar. They are Dr. Hassan Mahmood. He's the Director for Monetary Policy Department at the Central Bank of Nigeria, and Mr. Marco Hernandez, the lead economist for Nigeria at the World Bank. We're looking forward to their deliberations. Our moderator for today's session is Mrs. Toyi Sani. She's the Chief Executive Officer for Emerging Africa Capital Group. Please rise as we observe the Nigerian and Great British national anthems. Thank you very much, and please be seated. I'd like to introduce you to some of our webinar guidelines for smooth running of today's seminar. This webinar is being recorded, please be aware. We will be able to share the recordings on our website in due course. If you have any comments for discussion, please use the chat. But please note that when you have any questions, do submit them via the Q&A icon. We will be pleased and do our best to answer all the questions during the seminar. On that note, I'd like to warmly welcome, and it is indeed an honor, our president, the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce President and Chairman of Council, Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi, to deliver her welcome address. Thank you. Over to you, President.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vina. Distinguished past presidents, patrons, members of Council and ESCO, members of the Nigerian Chamber of Commerce, and our guest. I'm delighted to welcome you to this advocacy roundtable themed Building a Coherent Monetary Policy Framework, organized by the Advocacy Committee of the Chamber. I thank our sponsors, the Bank of Industry and the BCG, for their generosity. Do allow me to introduce the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce to those of you who are not familiar with us, but I'm sure those are in the minority. It was established in 1977 to promote trade and investment between Nigeria and Britain. The NBCC is affiliated with the British Chambers of Commerce, which gives members beneficial access to a network of 53 chambers across the UK and 71 other international affiliates. Membership of the NBCC is currently over 400 top corporate organizations from a cross-sector of economy. May I invite all those at this webinar who are yet to join the NBCC to commence the process by visiting our website and completing the membership application forms. Now to the reason we are here this afternoon. Nigeria's economy is highly dependent on crude oil and constitutes a major source for foreign exchange earnings and government revenue. Over the years, for various reasons, we have witnessed a depletion in the country's foreign reserves. Given the significant pressure on the naira as a result of the steep decline in foreign currency revenue accruing to government from petroleum, the CBN has taken several measures aimed at strengthening the naira over the years. Today, we intend to discuss these policies and how they have brought us where we are today, as well as Nigeria's exchange rate crisis and proffer suggestions on building a coherent monetary policy framework. Without a doubt, we have a panel of distinguished subject matter experts who will indeed do justice to the subject matter. I would like to introduce our guest speakers, Dr. Mohammed Hassan, Director, Monetary Policy Department, the Central Bank of Nigeria. In that capacity, it coordinates the formulation, design, and implementation of monetary policy, as well as the dissemination of the monetary policy outcomes. Dr. Mahmood currently serves as a secretary to the Nigeria Monetary Policy Committee, the highest monetary policy decision body in Nigeria. Prior to this role, he was a group head, macro-prudential analysis in the Financial Policy and Regulation Department of the Central Bank of Nigeria, where he oversees the conduct of the off-site macro-prudential surveillance and industry financial soundness indicator stress test. Our second panelist today is Dr. Marco Hernandez. Marco is the lead economist for Nigeria at the World Bank. Prior to this, he was the lead economist and program leader for Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. During his career at the World Bank, he has advised governments and conducted policy dialogue in various countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, Latin America, working in low, middle, and high-income countries and resource-rich countries. He has written several articles on economic growth and productivity, fiscal policy, trade and behavioral economics, as well as political economy. Marco holds a BSc in economics and has a PhD from the University of Oxford. My sister, Toyin Sonny, is an investment banker and author with over 30 years experience. Prior to founding Imagine Africa, she was Group Chief Executive Officer at the United Capital PLC. She's a fellow Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, a fellow Chartered Institute of Secretaries, fellow IAPM, member Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment, and UK President of the Association of Corporate and Individual Investment Advisors, Nigeria. She holds a law degree from the University of Ife, a master's degree in law from the University of Lagos, and has attended the CEO program of the Lagos Business School and the executive programs in the New York Institute of Finance, the Wharton School, and the Harvard Business School. Toyin is passionate about developing leaders and women, and she's the founder of Women in Finance, Nigeria and UK. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and now have the pleasure to invite Toyin to moderate the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to you and the incredible team at the NBCC for the great work that you do and for the opportunity to lead the discussion on this session and the honor of engaging with such highly rated speakers. And I would like to invite Dr. Mahmood and Marco to kindly make yourselves visible for this purpose. Thank you. You're very welcome to this conversation. So I would like to kick off the conversation by saying that first of all, this is clearly an excellent time to be discussing the issue of the policy framework for monetary policy in Nigeria, and specifically a coherent one, and may I add, a consistent one as well. And obviously, there are no better participants to engage in this conversation than the policymaker itself and Dr. Hassan Mahmoud, seeing the critical role he has played in formulating and implementing this policy in recent times. And of course, Marco Hernandez, who is a lead economist for the World Bank and focused on Nigeria, to give an independent World Bank perspective as to how we are doing and what we need to do to make a difference. According to the Central Bank of Nigeria, the primary objective of monetary policy remains the maintenance of price and financial system stability. And the CBN aims to curtail the level of inflation to a level that is conducive for economic growth and specifically inclusive and sustainable economic growth. It will be nice to know precisely from Dr. Mahmoud how the central bank rates itself in its achievement of these objectives. Now, related imperatives, and some of which have been mentioned in the introduction by Madam President, include the management of both the interest rate regime, which is critical for an attractive investment environment, and very, very importantly, for the real sector. And equally important is the foreign exchange rate regime, where we have witnessed significant volatility in recent times. Now, the central bank commits to being proactive in its oversight function of the banking system to continue to ensure financial system stability. And also, we have seen that the central bank has been deploying both the traditional tools that we are all familiar with the management, for the management of the monetary environment, which includes the reserve requirements, which includes the reserve rates, which includes the open market operations and discount rates. Now, we have seen central bank going beyond these traditional instruments to some innovative approach. And it will be nice to hear from Dr. Mahmoud how we think this will impact favorably on the monetary policy environment. It is worthy of note that yesterday, the president of Nigeria launched the e-Naira. And these are very early days, but it will be interesting to know how the e-Naira is expected to impact some of the concerns being the possibility of disintermediation of the deposit money banks and how this could possibly impact on the interest rate environment, which is critical to growth, economic growth. Now, also in a bid to stimulate the economy following the distortions, significant distortions caused by to the Nigerian economy and of course to global economies by the coronavirus pandemic, the monetary policy rate was adjusted from 12.5% to 11.5%. Prior to this, the central bank had held this rate consistently at 14% in 2018 and 13.5% between March 2019 and April 2020. In its September meeting, the CBN Monetary Policy Committee resolved to hold the MPR rate at 11.5% and the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 to minus 700 basis points around the MPR. And of course, the CRR at 27.5%, while the liquidity ratio is still held at 30%. Inflation remains of concern at north of 16% as at September, and exchange rate volatility also remains of concern. Volatility in exchange rates has far-reaching implications, as we all know, for macro and financial stability in an economy like Nigeria. Volatility distorts the market mechanisms in this economy. And when it becomes extreme, it can further fuel expectations of future volatility, which will intensify speculations and create exchange rate bubbles. Nigeria's forex market has evolved from a fixed regime in the 1960s to a pegged arrangement between the 1970s and the mid-1980s, and various types of managed floating systems since then. Still on volatility, two sectors that are highly vulnerable to exchange rate volatility are the trade and manufacturing sectors, which both have a combined contribution of 25.54% to Nigeria's GDP. Nigeria is an import-dependent nation, and this makes it highly vulnerable to exchange rate volatility, which then has a pass-through effect on inflation. As of Q1 2021, Nigeria's total import bill was 6.85 trillion compared to 2.91 trillion in export earnings. So rising global prices, coupled with the Naira depreciation, have made imported goods even more expensive, resulting in a higher import bill for the Nigerian government. What do we see as the causes of exchange rate volatility? It's interesting that whilst we say that rising exchange rates impacts on inflation, there is also the fact that inflation rate also impacts the exchange rate. So generally, countries with lower inflation rates have higher valued currencies compared to countries with high inflation. And I think I'm going to just round up my comments here to say that I am really eager to hear from Dr. Mahmood how these challenges are being tackled by the central bank, and of course to also hear the perspective from Marco Hernandez of the World Bank. Inflation does not appear to have been responding to the CBN's monetary policy, or am I being, is it too early to say that? The major reason why it seems that the CBN's monetary policy may not have had the right impact on inflation rates over time may be due to the other factors that are causing rising prices in the country. I will pause my comments here and just say that straight away I would like to invite Marco Hernandez to set the conversation rolling and share with us his perspectives on the monetary policy framework for Nigeria as it stands and the imperatives for the change that we desire. So please, Marco, you have 5 minutes to kindly unmute yourself and share your preliminary thoughts on this matter before we come back to Dr. Mahmood. Thank you. It appears you are muted, or is this from my end?
I think Marcos is muted, or maybe you have to unmute him.
Yeah, please kindly unmute yourself again. Let's see whether we can hear you this time.
His speaker is on. His speaker is on because it's showing green light. Maybe the volume, I don't know. Marcos, maybe you can check your volume.
Okay, while we wait to fix the challenge, I would like to invite Dr. Hassan Mahmood to please respond to some of these preliminary thoughts and share with us, how the policy direction of the central bank. And hopefully by the time you are through, maybe Marco will be able to join. Please, 5 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you very much. You see, while you were speaking, Toyin, I just thought, I think me and Marcos are supposed to be the moderator to be asking you questions, because you've said everything that we need to say, and you've diagnosed the whole monetary policy or central banking that I need to say. So I said, okay, I'll just be repeating myself and be referring back to you like Toyin said, because you've said everything. But I will still I'll just focus, because you digress the whole entire central banking and the role the central bank plays in the economy. But I'll just narrow it to the monetary policy side. And I know Marcus will also have a lot to say in this area because we have all the line discussions in this space. The monetary policy framework that has been adopted by the central bank now is what we call monetary targeting. And the monetary targeting is based on the quantity theory of money, based on the fact that we are looking at the quantity of money in the economy as a driver of prices. The general equation is MV equals to PY, which is, and then when you look at the money supply, then you look at the price of goods and services over the velocity of money. That primary concept or that simple equation is what drives our monetary targeting framework. And within that space, what we look at is the reserve money as the money within the system, and how that is related to the pace at which the economy is growing, the optimal liquidity sufficient for the optimal growth expectation that we have over that period. So that monitoring, we are not explicitly, and if I just I will try to be as simple as possible because it's a business environment. This is not an economics classroom, but I'll try to also explain this within the context of the structure of the Nigerian economy. And that will bring me back to the issues you raised around non-conventional monetary policy tools that have been used. And that is a product of whether the inflation that we are trying to moderate or to tame is a monetary phenomenon or it's a structural phenomenon. If monetary policy tools are not bringing that inflation in the short to medium term, then that means the short-term tools, which is what is at the disposal of monetary authorities, is not sufficient. It could be necessary, but not sufficient to bring that inflation number. So we have to, get into structural issues. And then those structures are mostly supposed to be handled by the fiscal authority. Or if there are also, fiscal space tightening in terms of resources on the fiscal authority side to drive that expansion in infrastructural development and stuff which are sometimes long term, then central bank does some interventions or quantitative easings to drive that supply side rigidity. So on the monetary policy side, that monetary targeting framework is what we adopt, and the ultimate the operational target, which is what we use on daily basis to mimic the movement in interest rates, and that will feed into the inflation numbers, is the operational target, which is the short-term money market rates, the rates for short-term overnight calls and OBBs that we have, treasury bills that we have within the system. However, the intermediate goal is to look at broad money, which is money supply, M2. Now we have M3, bringing in almost and stuff like that. But the ultimate goal is still inflation, bringing down that inflation numbers so that the inflation will be conducive for the level of employment growth we want, the inclusiveness of the GDP that will translate to sustainable economic growth. Other instruments we use within this space will include all around monetary management or the quantity of money in the system. We have the open market operation, which we use to mop up liquidity within the system if we think it's above the threshold. We have a liquidity forecast template that we use on daily basis to look at the volume of liquidity within the banking system. Everything I'm saying here is within the banking system. Currencies outside of the banking system and outside of our purview that are also challenged, and I know Marcus will bring a lot of that in, and that is also weakening the efficiency of monetary policy in this space because the informal sector is quite large. So most of these tools that we use to control this liquidity within the banking system is not covering the entirety of the economy. Let me just see if Marcus is back. I think I must have exhausted the 5 minutes by now.
Thank you,
Director Mahmoud. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Marcus.
Yes,
perfect. All right, this is what happens sometimes with this virtual connection. So let me share my screen quickly. And Director Mahmoud, thank you very much for your intro remarks and for saving me there when my mic was not working. If it's okay with all of you, I just wanted to share 3 slides to set the context and to put it into a broader perspective. Just to confirm, you can see my slides on the screen now? Yes, perfect. Okay, so let me just highlight this graph that puts Nigeria in a historical context. And I'll go very quickly through this, so just bear with me for a few minutes. The first one is the message about how critical it is to take action now, because we do see that Nigeria is at a critical moment in its history. If we look at the dark blue line, which shows per capita GDP from the 1970s to today, you would see that it oscillates. It sometimes goes down, sometimes has been going up, and now it's on a downward trajectory. Why? Because population growth is growing faster than the economy. It's as simple as that. Now, there are two more points to highlight. First is what has been behind the volatility that we see, and oil prices, which are shown in the dotted lines, is one of them, but also the alternative. And that alternative is shown in the light blue line, which is Indonesia's per capita GDP, which back in the 1970s, even up to the 1980s, it was growing. It was below the rate of what Nigeria was seeing, but consistently, because the country has been growing, it has been surpassing Nigeria, and now at a completely different trajectory and also level of development. Why is this important? Well, first of all, the comparison is interesting because Indonesia is a country that has a similar size of Nigeria. It's also multi-ethnic. It has been undergoing decades of military rule. It speaks different languages. It's also what we will call a noisy democracy in many ways, right? Where it's also not always easy to pass reforms and so forth. But somehow, there have been a consistent set of policies that have taken Indonesia to a different path. So that brings us to the point where we are now in 2021. And when we see that if we continue a business as usual, which would be the same pace of growth that we have been seeing since 2015, then slowly we will continue to see declines in per capita incomes. And that is, of course, something that we don't want to do, because that's also followed with limited job creation and so forth. We have the alternative, which is that Nigeria would rise to its potential and we'll see a faster rate of per capita GDP growth, similar to what we're seeing in Indonesia. So what would it take to get us there? And we'll discuss this during the panel. But it also faces an alternative, and that's a risk scenario. It could go back as well to a situation back in the 1980s, where it was a collapse in oil prices, but it was also followed by a retraction on policies and the mix that was not necessarily conducive for economic growth, for job creation, and for inclusion more broadly. So that is why is that critical, because right now we see how the number of million poor in Nigeria is faring, and not taking action would really mean millions and millions of additional poor Nigerians every year, right? Especially taking into account that we're seeing around 3.5 million young Nigerians entering the labor force every year. That's about 250,000 per month, right? For which we need to create jobs, right? So that's just to set the context. Now, on the macro side, low growth is a concern, but high inflation, as Toyin, you already highlighted in your introductory remarks, is a critical issue. So the graph on the left actually shows why we care so much about inflation. On the one hand is because it really affects the purchasing power of all Nigerians, but also because countries that have low inflation grow faster, right? And here in Nigeria, in the graph on the left-hand side, appears as a bit as an outlier. It's a country that is growing at a relatively low rate right now, and it's also one that has a very high rate of inflation, right? By containing that inflation, it would help us to push that trajectory very differently than what we're seeing in other emerging markets worldwide. But we also care because of the impact that is happening now as a result of high inflation. For example, in terms of poverty, what we have been able to estimate is that between 2020 and 2021, so just these 2 years, only considering the impact on inflation on food, that impact on inflation has already pushed 5.6 million Nigerians into poverty, right? So that's an incredible statistics when we consider how important Nigeria is, not only as a country in itself, but for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. 5.6 million more Nigerians just as a result of increase of what we call the inflation shock in 2020 and in 2021. It's an immense number that we need to take into account in all the different policies that we see. So yeah, inflation has been coming down the past few months, and that's good news, but definitely not good enough, especially when we consider the implications for the broader economy and for welfare as a whole. And the third slide that we wanted to show is in terms of the drivers, right? Because a lot of the time, when we try to unpack inflation, most of the inflation is driven by domestic food, increasing domestic food prices, not only imported food. But we wanted to highlight here, because we're talking about monetary policy, this is a graph that just shows the trajectories of inflation and the exchange rates. And here, our main message is that inflation follows the movements in the parallel rate. If you see the red line, which is inflation, and the dark blue line, which is the parallel rate, you see that as soon as it starts moving in 2015, 2016, that it starts pushing inflation up. Why? Because even if it's a market that has relatively small transactions, it is the anchor rate for most people in the economy, whether you're talking about a small farmer in Kano or a household enterprise in Lagos. They're using that rate as one of the anchor rate for their policy decisions. So that's why we see the importance of allowing more flexibility and clarity in the way that exchange rate management is going, because the situation in 2017 is particularly interesting. The INE window was created, and the INE window, the creation of that INE window completely changed in that part, the clarity and predictability of how foreign exchange was allocated in the country. And that allowed the parallel rate to come down. Rather than having pressure for the NAFIX to keep going up, it was the parallel rate coming down, and with that, it brought inflation down as well, right? So we do see that linkage, especially because we're discussing monetary and exchange rate issues today. Of course, there are other factors driving inflation. We know that. We know that it's about issues related to trade, issues related to fiscal policy. The border closure, of course, had an impact on inflation. It started in August of 2019 and throughout 2020. We also see, of course, that there are supply issues as a result of COVID. So there are other factors as well. But we do see the importance of containing inflation as a critical one and a key role that could be addressed through also the tools that monetary policy authorities and fiscal policy authorities would have. So this is just to set the context of why we care so much about inflation and how we see Nigeria at this critical juncture and the opportunity to really rise to its potential. So discussions about agendas going forward is one that we're keen to contribute and to discuss further in the panels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. This has been very helpful indeed. Again, to set the context as to why these critical indices are so important. And for me, just showing that how up to 5.6 million Nigerians have been pushed in, below the poverty line just in the last 1 year on account of rising inflation. It's quite painful to note. So thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Dr. Mahmood. And Dr. Mahmood, it's a good opportunity to say that contrary to what you thought, we really did have a lot to learn from even your preliminary intervention. And which is why I'm going to take my next question from a very important point that you mentioned, which is the fact that the regulatory ambit of the Central Bank of Nigeria is somewhat limited by the size of the informal market. So a lot of these activities and these policy thrusts by the central bank are not allowed to have the desired impact on the economy simply because of the size of the economy that is really still not included in the formal sector. I am aware that the central bank has been in the forefront of the drive towards greater financial inclusion, and it will be a good opportunity to share with us some of your policy thrusts in this direction and the impact that you believe it's making. Thank you. You are muted, sir. You are muted.
All right, thank you, Toyin. I hope you don't mind I call you Toyin. Okay, yeah. Yes, a lot of issues here. But like I said, I'll just try to focus on issues around monetary policy and how that translates to exchange rate, and the issue you just raised around other measures that we've used to support or complement to improve the potency of monetary policy tools in terms of the unconventional monetary policy tools. But there are two things I also want us to flag here. in every economy, the economy must have its objectives and must also have an approach, a framework towards achieving those objectives. We live in a global economic system, and everybody has its own expectations of the various economy for the commonality of that global system. But the hypocrisy we see in the world is, while economies of the world did not do what they're asking us to do to get their economies to the levels they are now, they are using that advocacy, like the British and Nigerian, is not saying that, okay, open up, let other people benefit from your economy. But for you to be competitive, you have to be at a level at par with those that you are competing with. If you are below the level that you're with the people you are competing, you are going to be smashed on, and you'll be nothing, and these guys will be growing up. So that philosophy is there. And you see, when you talk of creating that economic environment to attract inflows, to attract foreign investment, do you have the local investments? Are you opening up your economy for the world to enjoy or for your people to enjoy? It is very important. So is the FX policy you're doing, is it to attract foreign portfolio inflows? These are traders in currency, or to attract foreign direct investment, or to grow your domestic economies, or to open up your economies to export to those countries, not to import from them. We want to reverse from being import dependent to be export driven. China was so much export driven that it's not even getting out of export driven, and it kept its currency perpetually depreciated to push out that volume. Now they are looking inwards. Why should we not also look inwards to grow our own domestic economy to a competitive level that we can play at the global scene? You don't go there with fickle hands and say you want to play the same game with the others. They will match up and you are nothing. So I just want to bring that in, because that will justify some of the things we do and some of the perspective we take. We're also cognizant of the fact that we must play according to global standard, and we must play according to the global objective, expectation of how normal economies should behave and how they should interact in that global scene. And I'm bringing these issues up around why, when you start looking at, like Marcus gave an example that even though the parallel market rate is not the rate that central bank is looking at, but that is the anchor rate that people. I don't see how a farmer in Kano would decide to price his own yam or maize or barley that is selling at the exchange rate at the parallel market. Where is the yam going outside of the country? So you see, when we make those analogies, I just get thinking what, because you see, we talk of the purchasing power parity when we talk of this exchange rate, and you still look at it. If you say our exchange rate is significantly depreciated, how much does it cost to buy a bottle of Coke in Nigeria and a bottle of Coke in New York? Okay, compare that with the earnings of, let's say, unskilled labor force in the United States. How much is $1 per hour that you earn, and how much is an unskilled organizer earn in Nigeria? What can that fund fetch that organizer in Nigeria, and what can that do in? That's the parity. That's just the basic analysis of the parity that I'm purchasing power parity I'm talking of, and the component of imported inflation. So substantially, the issues we see are self-inflicted issues, and it's been preached severally. That if we don't look inward, if we don't take our destiny in our own hands, then we're left to doom. So it is important we put things in perspective. We must develop this domestic economy before we can talk of anything addressing exchange rate. You see, it is not it's not best practice to say, oh, we don't want FPIs. Yeah, because we need them into the economy. But one API that will benefit us. We don't want just to make people rich at the detriment of our own economy. People come in and just bring $2-3 billion and spend 10 days in Nigeria and make $100 million, and they go out. And when they can't go out, they start shouting, no, we can't move our money. What did you bring the money to do? To come and trade in our exchange? No. Put the money here, leave it here for 2-3 years. give people jobs, produce things, develop our technology, develop our capacity, domestic capacity. Then you can take whatever you want to take out. And we give the assurance that so long as you bring your money for investment, we give you the assurance that you will take your money out when you want to, like particularly your dividends and stuff. That is that side of it. I just really needed to address that side. Coming to the monetary policy side, you see, what I explained at the beginning was around the fact that, yes, inflation is our major goal. Price, just like you mentioned, that price and monetary stability is the primary goal of the central bank. And like Marcus mentioned, there are issues around what are the components of that inflation, the CPI now, and the food basket is the biggest proportion of that. And if you even see the inflation numbers we are having now, the main driver of that inflation going up substantially over the last 2-3 years has been food prices. Yes, the core inflation numbers are coming in, energy prices, all this petroleum, electricity, they're also coming in because, you see hikes going in that place, subsidies is significantly reducing that impact. If that goes up, it will feed into inflation substantially. But we are moderating that with the subsidy. Whether that is an efficient process or not, that's a different ballgame entirely. So if you look at that supply side rigidity and compare that to the demand side of this old inflation equation, you find out that substantial part of the issues are around this infrastructural development, driving the supply side rigidity, increasing inflows into the economy in terms of goods and services. That will bring that, because necessarily now, inflation is either cost push or supply side driven inflation numbers. And because we are pumping in some other liquidities into the economy, particularly following the COVID, you start seeing those liquidity building up without the supply meeting up with them. So you start seeing demand push inflation also coming in on board. So you see both sides of that coming in. But if we don't address that supply side substantially ab initio, then we will still be rolling around these cycles, and the short-term monetary policy tools we have, like I said, and you also mentioned, around addressing the liquidity within the banking system, within the former ecosystem, will still be translating to, the inflation numbers going down minimally. So the object, and we've seen this at the central bank end, and we can't sit down that central bank is part of the government. You can say this is the responsibility of fiscal authority, this is the responsibility of business community, whatever we can do together to achieve this goal. Who will do it if it is within your allowed constitutional powers to do? Yeah, you do it. You don't go into other people's territory, but whatever is within your own power to do, that's why we have a state. Everybody has his own portion to do, but it must be a collective thing to a common goal. So those interventions that you also mentioned are targeted around on de-risking the supply side problems and easing that conundrum that is not allowing credit. We've seen the efforts that central banks has made for banks to even give credit to the agricultural sector. We said it's the largest employer of labor, is the major driver of this, is the rural people are there. But banks don't want to go there because of issues around that place. You even give a loan to someone, you don't even know the person's address. You can't even go to the person's farm. And central bank wants banks to go there. And we say moral suasion, we give incentives, but they don't go. We give CRR, take 6% of your CRR. You can go and invest in agriculture. They don't pick it. You can't force them to do it. It's their business decisions. But if those de-risking of those critical sectors, Marcus just mentioned issues around per capita income, how the population number is overshooting our GDP growth numbers, and you start seeing negative per capita income. And that's why the slightest move in inflation on any of the parameters, the proportion that go into poverty is so huge, because you are just at the margin. So it is important that we look at why some of the decisions we take are taken within that context. It does not that those will be the framework in perpetuity, but as things change, or as you see some improvement, you see some positive outcomes, then you start adjusting in some of those areas. So principally, like I still maintain, monetary policy tools, and what we have now, particularly around the exchange that we are also flogging here, is demand management tools. We don't print dollars. We cannot bring in dollars just by depreciating the naira or appreciating the naira. There are other parameters that investors look at in an economy to bring in their funds. If those fundamentals are not right, people keep saying that Even during the wars in Afghanistan, investors go to Afghanistan to invest because they see the returns that they will get there, while the people of the country are running out of their country. And people are still seeing how they can invest in arms, how they can pay for internet and stuff like that. And they are moving their businesses there. They're taking the risk because the return is higher than the risk they are taking. So if we don't look at things from that perspective and that idiosyncratic philosophy of what is going to be good for you, but not detrimental to others, it's very important I emphasize this. Whatever you do should not be detrimental to others. It should be Pareto optimal, they call it in economics. So that as you are contributing to your own domestic growth, it is adding on to others in the external sector to drive that. So we must have this at the back of our mind, and that should also be our guiding principles for now, particularly that we're even in crisis. We said we're oil dependent, we're import dependent. These are not things you can change in 1 year or in 2 years. Or these are economic structures that you change with time. I know technology has fastened a lot of things now, so you can do this transformation. If you took a United Kingdom 200 years to be developed, it doesn't mean the current developing nations will do 200 years. You can still do that. We've seen the example Marcos gave now of Indonesia and Nigeria. The transformation is more or less starting at the same economic level, but the transformation we saw is just quadruples of what is happening in Nigeria. The fundamentals are also clear to all of us here. So issues around why central bank now is going into export stimulating interventions to drive export, because if you depreciate your naira, it's to enable you export. If you are not exporting anything except oil, which is not even determined, the price is not defined by you, then what's the benefit of your depreciation of the naira? Oh, so for inflows to come in and go out when they want to go out, and then you still stand in the same place. And that's why we still stand in the same place. Why Indonesia has gone that far, or Malaysia has gone that far, or other Southeast Asian economies have gone that far, because they did this inward-looking perspective to their macroeconomic policy trajectory to get to the level they are now, so they can play at the global scene very comfortably. With all the pressure for America, for United States for China to appreciate its currency, it never did. So I'm not saying these are things but for those periods, those were the essentials that brought them to here now, where they are counted among the second largest economy in the world, even though some still refer to them as developing economies, with external reserve of over $1 trillion. So, Toyi, I'm sure you forgive me for just digressing a bit. But so around my monetary policy intervention now, we still maintain that, yes, there could be monetary phenomenon in the inflation trajectory, but substantially there are structural issues. And these structural issues, we must address them together holistically as an economy: fiscal, monetary, financial, businesses, private sector, so that we can, because even when you talk of attracting capital, we can't even attract domestic capital because you don't have viable domestic business within the domestic economy. So we are looking for foreign partner. When you look for foreign partner, you start talking of exchange rate pressure because you can't get your own money domestically. Nobody will bring his money from abroad and he wants to go out. This is not his economy. He's doing his investment. He's allowed to do that anywhere in the world. And you start giving restriction that because, no, you love your economy, you can't take your money out. No, you asked him to come and you give him the incentives to come. So you should also create the room for him to be able to go out comfortably so that other people can also come. So I will leave it at that for now. And then when we come back to the next round of talks, I would also like to talk more on issues around central bank interventions and the areas that we are concentrating on, because we call them targeted interventions. We're not just taking over the entire space, but we want the ones that will enable us achieve our own mandate, which is monetary price stability. Thank you, Toyin.
Thank you very much. You have really made the points that your focus is monetary and price stability, the development of the domestic economy, attraction of long-term investment capital. I'm just going to go back straight to Marcos and say to Marcos that it would be nice to have your take on the particular types of reforms that you would like to see to the Nigerian government's approach to improve the monetary policy framework. So what policy reforms should Nigeria embrace specifically? Thank you.
Thank you again, and Director Mahmoud as well for your remarks. So if we're getting into some of the specific policy recommendations, let me preempt this by saying that the ones that I'm going to mention are going to be specifically focused on the current context in which we have a COVID crisis that we still need to manage, and levels of high inflation that we need to be brought down. So in that particular scenario, in the short term, and we're talking about the next, let's say, 6 months to 10 months or so, some of the critical actions that we highlight are in 6 areas. One is on exchange rate management, another one is on trade, another one is in fiscal policy, others on monetary policy. In a 5th category, the support to specific issues that micro and small firms are facing. And finally, the 6 areas on social protection. So I'm not going to be able to go into detail on all of this, but of course, during the conversation, I will be very happy to elaborate. So let me just highlight a few examples and how they are linked to each other. So from our remarks regarding especially the links between exchange rates and growth and also inflation, some of the key aspects that we highlight is the importance of having predictable policies around exchange rate management, in particular around the communication of how NAFEX, which is now the official rate, which is good news, so that it can boost the competitiveness of the economy. So, for example, one concrete idea would be to try to enhance the foreign exchange auction process, for example, using predefined exchange rate bands that control immediate overshooting. So what investors like is to understand how things may move into the future so that they can make their investment decisions. So in most emerging markets, there is a management of the exchange rate, but in order where the central bank intervenes to smooth any large fluctuations that happen. So some of the elements that can help us on that, for example, would be to further enhance that auction process, to also, bring banks back in so that they can play the interbank rates that were very prominent a few years ago, so that they can resume that. Those are 2 concrete ideas in that regard. Now, the issue of trade is one that I think could also merit more attention in a panel like this one, because there is a very clear link between trade and inflation. We fully understand the need to increase the value added of domestic industries. We support that. And what we feel is that sometimes there have been some initiatives that have had the objective of trying to maybe protect the local industry, to try to boost that production, but it may have had unintended consequences. So, for example, one of them has been the closing of borders, where we have been able to estimate that the closing of borders that happened in August of 2019, and then as a result of the ones that had to happen as a result of COVID, which were necessary for the health situation, they have increased inflation significantly. And so have also the presence of foreign exchange restrictions to trade. So fully reopening the land borders, facilitating a foreign exchange for staple foods, for medicines, and also for critical goods will help to reduce that inflation and also to support growth in the meantime, right? So let me just give you one example. For a farmer of tomatoes in Kano that brings products to different parts of the country, including in the south, let's say someone from Lagos is buying tomatoes. If we just close the borders, in this case with Benin, what that is going to result very likely is to just have higher priced tomatoes in Lagos. Why? Because it's very difficult to bring tomatoes from Kano to Lagos. For example, there are some statistics that show from maybe 10 trucks that will be bringing tomatoes, most of those trucks actually cannot bring the product because they have a range of different restrictions on connectivity, on roads, on the difficulties from crossing to state, on the lack of refrigerators in the trucks, and so on and so forth, that make most of those tomatoes to basically disappear along the way. So therefore, just closing the border without actually tackling those underlying issues would only just spur further challenges, right? So we feel that solving the power sector and improving connectivity and making sure that there's agglomeration on the agriculture side, greater competition policies so that small firms can enter the market more easily and get access to finance. Those are things that we feel are critical, and also with a broader solid macroeconomic framework that it's a credible and predictable would boost that confidence for people to bring their money. And as Director Mahmoud saying, for that investment to be long-term, right? Not necessarily just foreign portfolio investment, but really investment that will go into factories, into producing goods that could benefit Nigerians and the world as well. So those are two key elements: exchange rate and trade that I highlighted a few examples, just to give a couple of concrete examples and others. On fiscal policy, I think one of the critical items is to manage and monitor the stock of CD and overdraft that are being used, because right now the overdraft facility has grown tremendously over the last few years, and that is also putting more money into the system. And when you have more money and fewer goods, then you get rising inflation. On monetary policy, I think the strong signal of commitment to price stability as the primary objective, because of course now there is that balance between how much the monetary authorities are doing to push growth and also how much they're doing to contain inflation, including through interest rate, including to the CRR and other measures. I think that a strong commitment to price stability as the primary objective would also help to reduce that inflation, and that could be done in the shorter term. And then on social protection, which is a critical area, to improve the targeting of the cash transfer support. There are some elements of the National Social Safety Nets program that has improved, especially last year as a result of COVID, with the new rapid response register that includes not only rural areas, but also the urban poor and the poorest of the poor in a way for Nigeria, to be able to use digital system technologies and to improve the targeting of those programs could really help many families that are really struggling right now with limited job opportunities and rising prices. So let me just highlight that, and I'll be very happy to elaborate as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcos. I think the only one of the 6 areas that you recommended that I'm not sure I really picked your specific recommendations for the micro and small and medium scale enterprises who are clearly key drivers of growth in the economy. Are there any policy recommendations that you think could favorably impact this beyond the general ones you've talked about, of course?
Exactly. So I would say beyond the general ones, because I think those are the critical ones. We're talking, power, exchange rate issue, and the availability of foreign exchange, issues related to inflation and so forth. Beyond all of those, one would be the scoping exercises that could be expanded and launched that will screen eligible micro and small enterprises so that they can develop parameters for debt restructuring and for also delinquency in their credit. This is something that, of course, as a result of COVID, has been essential. We know that right now we're still seeing non-performing loans that are within the same levels, but that may increase as a result of firms that are finding it more difficult to pay their bills in the middle of a crisis. And this is not just unique to Nigeria; it happens in other countries as well. So trying to come up with those mechanisms where you can restructure, you can make delinquency less prominent as well, could really help in making firms that are small, especially micro ones, to have better forms of financing.
Thank you. I think if I would recommend a 7th, it would be to also pay attention to the gender space and the level of or lack of inclusion of women and youths, and policies that can drive greater economic participation from these marginalized groups. I'm going to now pose 1 or 2 questions that they have been put in the Q&A, and I want to encourage, if anybody amongst the participants, we are very glad to have you on board. We have quite a few participants, close to 100. If any of you would like to have a question answered by these brilliant speakers, please put it in now in the Q&A box because we're just about to close this segment. So I have 4 questions that I'm going to distribute amongst us. The very first one that I had is specifically addressed to Dr. Mahmood. It says, how does the e-Naira fit into our monetary policy framework, and what is it intended to achieve? And if you don't mind, if you, in addressing that, you can also talk about the possible unintended consequences and how the CBN hopes to manage this, that would be very useful. So because we are now like in our last like 15 minutes or so, I would be pegging times for responses to questions. So Dr. Mahmood, I would love to hear your response in about 3 minutes, if you don't mind.
All right, thank you very much. And I must say that I absolutely agree with Marcos on a number of the policy options he gave, particularly around how to have these policy consistencies to enable investors to take medium to long-term decisions, because that is what will attract those inflows that we are talking about. But he also raised issues around issues around trade, issues around where we have restrictions on some items for access to FX, border closures. It's a very valid points, but however, like I just mentioned earlier, they are just they are babies of circumstances, because we have this huge demand pressure. The supply is not there, the reserve is not there, so you just have to use some administrative tools to do that. They are not very efficient because they bring their own distortions and some imbalances within the system, but sometimes you just need to do that to moderate the immediate pressure, and then as things smoothen out, then you start letting those away and allow the market system to bring out the price discovery function that is supposed to hold. On issues around e-Naira and how that is going to build into our monetary policy framework. One, a lot benefits are supposed to come from that. e-Naira is just the digital form of the Naira. I mentioned earlier that our monetary policy framework is monetary targeting, the quantity of money in circulation. And a lot of the participants here will also be aware that central bank is doing a lot of effort or spending a lot of resources on managing liquidity. Because when we mop up liquidity, I mentioned about open market operation. When we mop up liquidity within the system and hold it, we hold it at a cost. And we have to pay the FIs that cost, and that cost is hit into the returns of the central bank, which is also supposed to go as revenue to the government. So that is a lot. Managing that liquidity is also very critical for domestic prices, including inflation, including the money market rates. That volume of liquidity was because we don't want the money market rate to crash to a level, even though we are looking for low interest rates, because we are looking for low interest rates to attract savings and also to get investment. And investment don't come if there are no savings. And savings need some jack up in the rate for them to come into you have your national savings base. So there's that balancing act. While we are moderating prices so that they don't go up too much, we're also trying to stimulate supply by increasing those prices too, so that your GDP numbers are going. So that dilemma keeps going, but how you manage it is very critical. The e-Naira is supposed to play that role of an alternative Naira, Naira cash in the digital form. So if you have a proportion, because what we have now is that the e-Naira will come from your cash Naira. So you can only upload your e-Naira wallet from your cash Naira account. So if you are moving that from cash Naira account to e-Naira, you have already saved a huge part of our liquidity problem. And then these transactions that you are going to be doing will be done in e-Naira. So if you are going to the stores, you are going to the hotels, you are going to wherever, you'll be spending the e-Naira. So that is not cash for us to manage. We don't need to treat those mutilated ones. We don't need to incinerate them or burn them, or the management cost of that cash is off. The cost of minting the e-Naira compared to the cost of minting the Naira, so the seigniorage and stuff will also be a major benefit to the central bank. And the most important part of it is the transparency or the informality that you bring into the formal sector. Because immediately you're on board on e-Naira wallet, the central bank already have your statistics. You have officially come into the formal banking system. It is good for your revenue inflows is good for you for the transmission of monetary policy because you have a larger proportion of those funds within the monetary policy system. So the issues about monetary policy efficiency or the spread of monetary policy impact or how your monetary policy, there's this argument always that the monetary policy rate, which is the anchor rate that we use to drive this short-term money market rate, it's not, the transmission mechanism is very weak. It's because of these issues that I'm mentioning, because the proportion of the liquidity you think you are controlling are outside of your system. But the more of that you get in, the financial inclusion issue that you brought in will also be, access to this e-Naira wallet will already bring you into the board of where you can have access to financial services, including economic empowerment. Because we also said that government can also use that channel for this conditional cash transfer, for interventions, for agriculture, for manufacturing, and all that initiatives that you do by just getting your own e-Naira wallet at the government level, public sector level, and do that for the citizens of the economy efficiently and less cost implication. The e-Naira also is also an efficient and faster, cheaper means of transactions. We always claim that we have a very robust, efficient payment system infrastructure. But we need income to be, Marcus has also emphasized on that. You need the income, disposable income, to be able to participate in all these evolutions and transformations that you see within the economy. So economic growth should be participatory, should be inclusive, so that the largest proportion of the economy comes into this economic welfare system, where they're able to earn income, create jobs, or get themselves employed, earn their living, be able to feed themselves. And you start building that. They can be able to take their kids to school, meet their medical expenses. And then that's how you build an economy and you improve the standard of living of the people. So in the long run, some of these things I mentioned about e-Naira, it's not going to happen in October or 2022. It's in the long run because the e-Naira we are doing now is more of a retail. When we go wholesale, we can be able to address a lot of these monetary policy issues, liquidity management, mopping up through the e-Naira. We can be able to do that. And this will also impact on the exchange rate side. Because if the acceptability improves substantially, because everything depends on the acceptability of the e-Naira, on the adoption by merchant, on the adoption by cross-border partners. If that acceptability or trust in the e-Naira scales substantially over time, then you see that also reduces substantially this demand pressure. Because if you can be able to use that channel to make payments cross-border, then you don't need the foreign currency to do that. However, you also need a central clearing system to do that. I know BIS and other regional institutions, I know ECOWAS will also start looking at that when many countries within the region are also adopting that. So I think the benefits are numerous, apart from the fact that fintechs and other solution providers can, even financial institutions, can also act on that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Did we lose Dr. Mahmood, or am I the one that is frozen? Am I back? Thank you. Apologies. I don't know what happened, but thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood. Although it does look like Dr. Mahmood is also frozen, but I know that I'm back. So thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood. That was excellent. And I'm just going to go to the next question. And the next question is for you, Marco. It says there is a disconnect between inflation trajectory and market realities. Welcome back, Dr. Mahmood. So Marco, there is a disconnection or a disconnect between inflation trajectory and market realities. Consumer price movement no longer mirrors prices of goods and services in the market. Don't you think it's high time we revised and repackaged the consumer price? Oh, this is also for Dr. Mahmood. Sorry, let me go to the other question that is for Marco, and then I'll come back to Dr. Mahmood. Just give him some time to breathe. So there's a question that says monetary policy framework. Okay, with reference to conventional monetary policy tools, no longer have a strong transmissive impact on key economic outcomes, growth, employment, and even inflation. More worrisome is the fact that CBN is greatly involved in several for its fiscal activities rather than streamlining its attention only on its primary objective of price stability. What needs to be done to revive the potency of monetary policy in Nigeria? I know Dr. Mahmood is itching to answer that, but for now, I would like to get your take on this, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you. No, and of course, we look forward to having Director Mahmood expand on this, but let me just take a step back and highlight the importance of just having a sound monetary policy framework and very coordinated with the fiscal policy, right? But what does it mean to have a sound monetary policy framework? We believe it basically is highlighted in 4 pillars, right? The first one is a commitment, and that's why we highlighted that, especially within the next 6 months or so, it is that important to have that commitment, in this case, to price stability, so that it can contain inflation more effectively. To have the second one is about the accountability framework, right? Is that those checks and balances. The third one is the credibility of the policy itself. And the fourth one is the transparency, right? So having one is good, having the 4, it would make a sound monetary policy framework. So it doesn't matter what is a monetary policy regime, because any reform should be aimed at strengthening these 4 pillars and to reduce the constraints that prevent the monetary policy framework from being consistent, from being accountable, credible, and transparent. So then in that context, then we think about Nigeria, right? And then we say, like, how are we doing with these 4 dimensions, and what could be done to improve? So one of the recommendations that we were discussing before actually goes in that direction. And in the same way, some of the others that we're highlighting, because just like we need a sound monetary policy framework, we also need a sound fiscal one, we also need a sound trade one, etc. So here, for instance, the question is what the monetary authority want to achieve. Is it purely price stability, considering how high inflation is at the moment and the fact that it's pushing people into poverty? Or is it growth? Or is it to have a fully flexible exchange rate? Is it to have a fully fixed exchange, right? So depending on how those objectives go, then some of these dimensions could be highlighted. Let me just take the case of inflation, right? Because I know I can see on the screen that there are a lot of questions about inflation, the links with policies and so forth. So one key aspect to highlight in Nigeria is that in 2021, inflation was the 6th highest in sub-Saharan Africa. And in 2022, it is projected to be also between the 6th and 7th highest in the whole region. The difference is that most of the countries in the region are gradually recovering in terms of growth and including per capita growth. But in Nigeria, that is not expected to be the case. For 2022, even though growth is expected to be higher than this year, it is still projected to be below the rate of population growth. So it is a case, once again, that we see inflation that is high, but also growth that is relatively low. So in that particular scenario, inflation will continue to push people into poverty, as Director Mahmood already highlighted as well, right? Now, the counterfactual is an interesting discussion as well, because if we were to take the goal that the CBN has, which is around 6 to 9% of inflation, that's the target for inflation, that round, and if we would have applied that to the years of 2020 and 2021, we would have found out that 8 million Nigerians would not have fallen into poverty during the same period. So we saw at the beginning of the presentation that we have seen an increase of 5.6 million people that are falling into poverty in these 2 years. Or the alternative would have been that you have an alternative of 8 million not falling into poverty. Now, of course, we can discuss the specifics of this, but just to have a broad mind that having actually achieved that goal that the CBN already has in mind would have had tremendous positive implications for the economy, right? So we know COVID was a severe crisis, much severe that many have expected. Nigeria was facing shocks from many different directions, right? What was happening with the pandemic itself on health, what was happening with oil prices, what was happening with global markets and trade and increasing in shipping costs and so on and so forth. But within that context, what we're seeing is that many have been able to start containing inflation already, because inflation right now is a discussion that is more prominent in advanced economies. But in emerging markets, many have been able to contain inflation, right? But in Nigeria, inflation still remains high. That's why we were highlighting that at the beginning. And I'm mentioning that because I know a lot of the participants in the room are very interested in the linkages between what we're seeing on inflation, poverty, and growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. We have just 2 minutes more, and I'm just going to give Dr. Mahmood 1 minute to address the question that I raised earlier, which is that don't you think it's high time we revised and repackage the consumer price basket and methodology for inflation computation in view of the fact that consumer price movement no longer mirrors prices of goods and services in the market? If you just have a minute that you want to address that, and then we'll close. Thank you.
Yeah, we've shared this idea with the MBS, who are the compilers of the inflation numbers, that yes, it's important that this CPI composition be reviewed substantially to see, because the economic fundamentals are changing. Our economy is moving more from production or primary production now to services, and you see the implications of issues around power and fuel prices and all those costs coming in substantially, including taxes. So it's a research going on between the central bank and MBS to look at those numbers. There are issues around, since we have POS and electronic means of payment, why INARA is just another option. So that's just a simple question. It's another option. If you have a means to go to the airport from here, if you have a train, if you have a bus, if you have a car, if you have an Uber, the more options you have, the better the choices you have. So it's not replacing them. If you prefer to use those means because you find them more beneficial, so you go with that. If you find INARA more efficient, even if you want cash, so or other means to do it, it's just to give you more flair into that area, and then the efficiency of each one will drive that. Is the SME windows that we created for this FX. We call it the SME window for FX, where you get $20,000, I think it's every month or so, for small business to bring in machineries to start up their business. I think it is working very fine. It has been very, very beneficial, because we've emphasized now that most of the interventions should go to the lower income cadre. Marcus has been mentioning issues around how we just drove into poverty very quickly, because that income level is extremely very low. So it is important that the SMEs, the households, are really empowered to generate that income that will drive the economy, even if the inflation numbers are going up. And per capita income or the GDP number is going up faster than that number, then you start seeing that balancing our real per capita GDP is going up. I think those are the two that I can remember, except if Tony, you want to add something. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, I think we do have to close now. I would like to really thank you so very much, Dr. Hassan Mahmood, for your very enlightening presentation and for your responses to the questions. Thank you so very much, Mr. Marco Hernandez, for your interventions and for giving us a broader perspective on some of these issues. It's been a real pleasure leading this. I am aware that we have sponsors for this event. I understand Bank of Industry and BCG are the sponsors, and we are to stand back now for an advertisement from one of the sponsors. Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you so very much, participants. Please do not log off. I believe that there is a message coming from the organizers of this event after the advertisement. Thank you.
Thank you.
For over 6 decades, Bank of Industry has been here, driving Nigeria's industrial development through financial and business support services to micro enterprises, small and medium enterprises, and large enterprises across Nigeria. Leveraging on strategic partnerships, we provide equipment financing, working capital, and support to enterprises in key sectors of Nigeria's economy, including youth and women-led enterprises. Whatever your business needs, starting up, expansion, diversification, modernization, or rehabilitation, we'll be here, always to support you. Bank of Industry, transforming Nigeria's industrial sector.
Good afternoon. My name is Akin Oshuntoki. My task this afternoon is the easy one, and is to say a big thank you to all of us. First, let me thank our speakers, Dr. Azan Mahmood, Mr. Marco Hernandez. It's been an hour of presentations and discussions that has gone very, very well. On behalf of the Nigerian-British Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to say a big thank you for coming. Also, I must thank our moderator, Mrs. Toyin Sonny, for the great job moderating this event. I must thank our president, our patrons and council members for the support that they give the chamber from time to time. Our sponsors have been so generous. We must thank the Bank of Industry and the BSG Group, the Boston Consulting Group, for sponsoring this event. Of course, without the participants, the distinguished ladies and gentlemen who were on the call or who are still on the call today, it would not have been this interesting. We thank them for participating. We must thank the Advocacy Committee. We must thank Ms. Renu for her role, and indeed every member of the Advocacy Committee. Of course, our secretariat, the headquarters, the MBCC headquarters, have always done a great, great job. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being at this event. Before I go, let me share with you some of the plans that we still have for October. October has been a very busy month, and I must also say that we are starting November quite busy as well. The third edition of the African EduTech Conference, scheduled to hold on Thursday, October 28th, will hold at 10 a.m. Please join us. It promises to be an interesting session. Of the MBCC Investment Series, the first in the series, is coming up on November 4 at 2 p.m. We're looking at public-private partnerships, and we are looking at the investment and concession opportunities that are coming up in Nigeria. Nigerians must begin to invest in Nigeria. It is important. This is the way to grow the economy. A webinar organized by the Construction and Real Estate Group will also come up on Thursday, November 11 at 11 a.m. We are looking at the efficient tax management for real estate development and investment. Please join us. We have a panel of experts that will be speaking at that event. I'll also like to mention to us that our inauguration dinner for our 17th president, Mrs. Bisi Adeyemi, will come up on December 3rd, Friday, December 3rd. It is going to be a very interesting event. We plan to hold this at the Eco Hotels and Suites, and it's going to be an evening of great entertainment. Please do join us. The chairman of that event is Dr. Olayemi Cardoso, and the speaker is Mrs. Mobola Johnson. She will be making a presentation, as she's going to make a presentation at that event. She's our guest speaker, and indeed, plans have been made to ensure that we have a very, very good evening. You want to become a member of the chamber, the MBCC, please check out our website, and you have very great details on how to join. Before I go, let me also quickly thank our sponsors once again, the Back of the Industry and the Boston Consulting Group. It's been a very great afternoon. It's been our pleasure at the MBCC to bring webinars, conferences, events from time to time, and we are happy that we keep on adding value to members and non-members alike. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a very good afternoon. Thank you.